Let's go now to Republican Congressman Tom Cole of Oklahoma. Hey, and Tom, I don't want to get into a debate on the specific policy issues. Want to talk much more broadly. I am just curious, if you don't mind, if I can go down a checklist. Bump stocks. Would you be fine banning bump stocks?
Yes.
Okay. What about expanded background check? There are really two plans out there. One the NRA even supports, and that's the Cornyn-Murphy plan. You good with that?
Yes.
What about as it expands out, and it's what Pat Toomey and Joe Manchin had supported several years ago? How about that?
I'd need to go back and look at that. I don't really recall the specifics of it. We've been dealing with the Cornyn bill, so on that one, got to go back and read. And then assault-style weapons, what's your position on that? No. I think that's, frankly, semi-automatic is a legal weapon, and automatic is not. Hence the bump stock ban, but no, I would not be for an outright ban. How about raising the age from, say, 18 to 21? I think that's a decision, honestly, best left with the states. It looks like Florida's going to do that. Some other states have done it. So, to me, that's the best approach. So we've been talking about, obviously, gun deaths are down. Violence has been down over the past 15, 20 years. But yet there seems to be an epidemic of deeply troubled people getting a hold of AR-15 style weapons, assault-style, military-style weapons, and going into schools, theaters, country music concerts, Baptist churches, and shooting people up. How do we, is there anything that you believe the government can do to slow down the rate of those mass killings? I think there's a number of things we can do. Some of them are broad and a little amorphous. Look, we need to look a little bit at our culture and the purveyance of violence on everything from movies to video games and really relook at that. I think that really hurts some troubled people. Second, I think there's some things we can do, obviously, in terms of background checks. We had a massive failure in Florida by both local and federal law enforcement, had plenty of crews, not much excuse for it. So those sorts of things can be done. And then I think you have to seriously look at hardening some of the targets. It's interesting to me, these things don't tend to occur in municipal buildings where there's visible security, on airports. They're happening in places where there really isn't any. So you're really going to have to look at spending serious money and upgrading and hardening those targets so that anybody that thinks about it knows that if they go there, they're certainly going to be confronted. And you would support sending money to the states to make that happen? I would. I think, there's a federal, state, local shared responsibility. I don't think it should all be federal. But, yeah, I think that's something we ought to look seriously at doing on a grant basis. And, again, I think you've got to do that within the context of the culture of the state. There's probably a big difference between the way people in Oklahoma would look at this and maybe the way people in New York City would look at this. So, but I think you've got to have a flexible program, work with local people, provide them with what they think they need, provide security for their children.
Congressman, it's Willie Geist. As part of hardening those schools, would you agree with the president that some teachers ought to carry weapons inside the school building?
I think that's very much an individual and a local choice. Personally, I don't have a problem with that. I don't think any teacher should be required to do it. You would have to make sure you had adequate training. But if some people wanted to do it, look, I can't imagine the horror that those students and the teachers felt. I know personally, if I were there, knowing somebody was available that might be able to stop it would be a help. But again, I think that's got to be done within the context of what local school boards and parents want to do.
So if a teacher already had a concealed carry permit, for example, they would be fine to carry it in?
Yeah, well, again, if that's what board decided and they went through the adequate training and background checks like everybody else. Look, that's pretty common, at least in my part of the world. Concealed carry is not unusual. Probably 1 out of every 2 households in Oklahoma has a gun. So, again, that does not concern me. I mean, I move in that world every day, and the people that have gone through background checks and hold concealed carry, are almost never implicated in any crimes. That's the point. They've been tested. We know who they are. They've given us their information. So I think those are people that in an emergency situation might be helpful.
So you said no on a ban on assault weapons, and I'm curious because you said it's a legal weapon. Well, what about making it illegal? Like, How would that impact your constituents in a negative way?
I have lots of constituents. I live in a neighborhood that's full of people that have AR-15s. I don't think I live in a dangerous neighborhood. They use them for sporting purposes, target practice. It's a normal type thing for them. There are millions of them in circulation, not a few thousand. So how you would actually get them all back, I think, would be quite a challenge in this country.
What about if you're not interested?
Try these other things.
Yeah. What about if you're not interested in getting them back? Because as at least I've said here, confiscation is a non-starter. But what about stopping to sell in the future? So people like Nicholas Cruz, who get angry, get disturbed, go into a sporting goods store, gets a gun, and shoots up his school. What about just making purchases in the future much, much more difficult?
Well, again, Nicholas Cruz should have never had a weapon. I mean, 39 times local law enforcement visited his home. FBI has credible tips. Nothing happens. So that, to me, is a systems failure. But he certainly should. People like that, if you're talking about, particular categories that identifying him, making sure they don't get them, absolutely true. I mean, he shouldn't have never.
All right, Congressman Tom Cole, thank you for being on this morning.
Thank you, Congressman. Appreciate it.